else is joining right away? Okay, so I've started the recording. And then let's have a look what we're going to cover for this evening session. So what I thought to do for this evening, let me just give you some kind of context. As of this evening or today, this week, you've got 3 weekends. Let me put this in the chat. 3 weekends before handing for your assignment 2. Assignment 2 has 3 questions. So that means at least 1 question per weekend. And that will get you finished with an assignment with good marks, and that you can then hand in on time. Okay, so I want you to plan for that, because I know you've got other modules and other work. So please don't leave the assignment until the week before it's due. Give yourself those 3 weeks where you take 1 question per week. So that really means you can follow up on the do the examples in the textbook, read the text, study it, and then answer the question. And in that way, you can really, you make sure that you can get good marks. Is that question 1 for assignment 1, Nungesi? That was your, that was a research question. That was the one about all the different sources of, question, you've already done it. Oh, there you go. Perfect. You see, you've already done that. That's awesome. Yes, because question 1 is a very long question. So hopefully you have made a start on that already. Okay, so your assignment 2 is going to concentrate on learning unit 4 and 5. Learning unit 4 and 5. So that is working capital and current assets. And then the second one is current liabilities. So where are my notes? Sorry, I've got stuff all over my desk because I just had another class as well. So if we have a look quickly at your questions, your question 1 is theory questions, and most of those are research based. Most question 1.1 is going to be from LU5, and 1.2 is also from LU5. So that's the current liabilities. And then your question 1.3 is based on learning unit 4, which is working capital and current assets management. So question 1 is really nice. It covers both learning units, but it's mostly research based. And guys, please don't attempt that question without carefully reading through LU4 and 5 in your textbooks with a highlighter and making some summary notes, and understand they're really good. Your textbooks are really good, and they explain everything very well, and they really give you the core of what you need to know without any extraneous fluff that you don't need to read through. So I like these textbooks because they really are to the point and give you what you need to know. So make sure you read the learning units first and then go and tackle the questions, because there will be clues in the textbook as to where you need to go to look for the answers. So your 1.1, you're going to be discussing current liabilities. Your 1.2, you're going to be discussing policies regarding paying suppliers. So suppliers is accounts payable, which is a current liability. And then in question 1.3, you've got to talk about negative working capital. So your learning unit 4 is also on the first part of learning unit 4 is on the working capital side. And in learning unit 4, they do discuss negative working capital in a couple of places. I'll also give you there's some questions in the question bank that discuss negative working capital, so you can get an idea of what they're talking about before you go ahead and answer that question. Because remember, your answers must be, sorry, I don't know why I've still got that on the screen. Let me just go forward here. all these pages. Here we go. So question 1 is half of the paper, 50 marks. So as I said, question 1.1 is basically for 20 marks. You are required to discuss the importance of current liabilities and discuss the role of current liabilities in the financial health of a company. Okay, remember, I've always told you, break the questions down really well. You've got that and there. So they say discuss. So number 1, discuss the importance of current liabilities. And number 2, discuss the role of current liabilities in the financial health of a company. And then they give you some hints. You can include the elements of working capital. So that would require you to know what the elements of working capital are. That's described beautifully in the introduction to that chapter. Also include the management of current liabilities and include a discussion on the impact of current liabilities on the health of your company. So do you see how I'm breaking the question apart into its bits? So what I would do in a little notebook, I would write those all as bullet points, one underneath each other, and then tick them as I went along in my answer to make sure I had discussed the importance, I had discussed the role regarding the financial health, I had included all the elements of working capital, I had discussed the management of current liabilities, and I had discussed the impact of current liabilities in the health. So there's basically 6 or 7 different aspects that you need to include in that question for the 20 marks. Okay. Also, obviously, paying attention to this little description that they've given you about the current ratio and all the rest of it. But I really like this question because it requires you to thoroughly understand how a financial manager needs to look at their current liabilities in terms of managing the working capital of the company as a whole. Because remember, in your textbook, it says this whole thing of managing our working capital, which consists of current assets and current liabilities, is this balancing act. And then for 15 marks, the second one, also take note, it says here, provide some examples. It's not or, it's of policies. Okay, of policies, which illustrate the statement and discuss their impact on liquidity and profitability. So where I was talking about this balancing act, this is kind of what they cover here, where they say the policies a company adopts with respect to paying its suppliers, which is our accounts payable, can affect both the company's liquidity as well as its profitability, and sometimes in the opposite direction. So this is the balancing act that we're talking about. So you'll find stuff in the textbook, and obviously go and look online as well and find some other sources. Please, the one thing that I noticed in Learning Unit 1, probably about half, not Learning Unit 1, Assignment 1, probably about half the students were really good about referencing, and you referenced in-text referencing with your various paragraphs properly from your different sources. And then the other half of the students either didn't do good research or they just don't know how to reference properly, and they only wrote a reference at the end of the entire question or at the end of a paragraph. So please make sure you go and revise proper in-text referencing when you are discussing, when you've got a discussion question. Because remember, in a discussion question, you've got to say, in the opinion of, and then in brackets, the reference, they say that blah, 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 whatever. But then, and then second reference says that also, and then, so you keep the references in the paragraphs itself. So please make sure you understand that, because you guys are third years, and we have to mark you down subtract marks if your referencing is not correctly done, because you're third years. And if you're going to carry on next year and do honors, you've got to do research, and referencing is absolutely paramount. Oh, no problem, Norman. It's recorded what we've done so far, so you'll be able to just catch up on our discussion. I was just reminding everybody about being super careful on referencing. And our question 1 is all, this 50 marks is all going to involve discussion, and we want good referencing. So please be very, very careful of that. And then your question 1.3, which is also for 15 marks, and this is the one about negative working capital. It's closely tied to the current ratio. Do you guys remember your current ratio? Who can tell me what the current ratio is? This guy, you did this last year in Finance 2. What's the formula for the current ratio? Yep, that's it. What's the ratio of your current assets in the company versus the current liabilities? This is in the textbook, negative working capital. They describe exactly that, how you can arrive at a negative working capital. But what they don't have in the textbook is a very long discussion of this part here, using descriptions of various scenarios that could arise, how a negative, etc., etc. So again, what they're doing here, and it's a very clever question, they know that it's easy to find out how to calculate negative working capital, but can you translate that theoretical knowledge into actual real-life practical case studies or scenarios that show me that you understand that whole concept of negative working capital, how it could arise and what sort of situations that would mean for the company. So we're really testing that you can't just go to the textbook and paraphrase into your assignment. You must be able to explain scenarios that you come up with in your own imagination and explain it in your own words that can prove that you understand what we're talking about or what you're talking about. So that's why you need to allow yourself a lot of time, because these questions look easy, but you need to really apply the theory in these questions. So you need to use a lot of your own brain power to get all 50 marks. Exactly, yeah. And then, they talk about what type of business this would arise in, because obviously there's certain types of business that you would never get a negative working capital in. Otherwise, you are in serious trouble. And other types of business where we actually expect to have a negative working capital almost continuously, because that's the nature of our business model. So that's what we want to see in your answer, that you understand that. Okay, so I just also want to say before we go on, let me just double check this and put these dates in the chat. Your assignment 2 is due on the 9th of October. We've got another collab, so the NSS collab is going to be on the 28th of September. And I don't think we've got we haven't got another one before that. So we've got tonight, and then on the 28th of September, we've got the NSS, where we'll go over all of the questions, anything that you've got, any questions you've got on the collab, and any other things we need to go through on the 28th of September as well. Okay, so there's your question 1. I didn't really want to spend too much time this evening on that, because we can go over that again later. Then your question 2 is on Learning Unit 5, which is your current liabilities question. And I'm not going to go through this one tonight. We'll have a look at this again in more detail on the 28th of September. This is quite an easy one for you guys to manage on your own. The section on the loans, you'll find it in the textbook. You'll find very similar questions in the textbook, and you honestly should not, using the textbook, you should not battle with these 20 marks at all. But we'll do some of these loan questions on the 28th of September. But what I wanted to spend a little bit of time with this evening is question 3 for 30 marks, and just give you a little bit of heads up on where to go in your textbook and which questions you can have a look at. That will give you some lead into how to go to this question, because there isn't a question exactly like this one in the textbook. Again, you've got to have a look at your Learning Unit 4 Working Capital Management section of Learning Unit 4. Go through all of those examples. The why have I lost my, oh, there we go. Very carefully read through right from page 99, your introduction. It's vital that you do this, particularly for question 3. And question 4 actually is there was a part in question 1 where you really need to read this introduction very carefully, the section on overcapitalization, overtrading, and all of that. And then from page 102, we get to the actual calculations of the operating cycle and the cash conversion cycle. And those calculations are where you're going to apply to question 3. So your sections that you want to look at for this question are page 103, which are the calculations for the operating cycle, page 105, which are the examples and calculations for the cash conversion cycle. You want to make sure that you understand question 4.1 on page 106, because that includes some of the calculations that you need for question 3. And then also revision question 1. I can't read my own handwriting, on page 139. And also revision question 2 and 3 on page 139 and page 140. Okay, so the operating cycle and cash conversion cycle formulas and theory, page 103 to 105, you need to thoroughly go through that with the examples. Example 4.1 on page 104, example 4.2 on page 106, and make sure you understand that and understand those calculations. Then make sure you can attempt question 4.1 on your own and see if you can get that answer right. And then that will, only after that, try and do question 3. And I would also attempt the revision question 1, 2, and 3, which are page 139 and page 140 in your textbook. And remember, with all of those, with question 4.1 and the revision questions, you've got the solutions in your textbook. So try and do them on your own without looking at the solution, and then use the solution to make sure you've understood the questions and you can do them. And then when you've completed that, then go ahead and tackle question 3. Because question 3's wording, in the way that they've worded the question and the required, is slightly different to the questions in the textbook. And if you don't understand the application of the theory in the questions in the textbook, then you're going to battle with this question here, with this question in your assignment. So let's just have a look at this question itself. We've got, have any of you gone through this work in your textbook already, Learning Unit 4? Are any of you up to that? Have any of you studied that already? I'm not sure. I know I've been giving you the pacer in the announcements every week, but I know with having to do assignment 1, some of you might be a little bit behind. So I don't know if you, is anybody up to, has anybody gone through that? You're going to be starting that this weekend, yeah. Okay, I kind of thought that you guys probably aren't there, but that's very important that you do that studying. Okay, so let's just have a look then at the question. You know what I want to do instead? Let's have a look at the textbook. Go to question 4. Go to question 4.1 in your textbook. Oh, there we go. And let's just have a look at that question. So then I can explain some of these calculations to you, which is going to then help you to apply these calculations to your question 3 in the assignment. So our operating cycle is our working capital, which is our current assets, inventory, and accounts receivable. So what we do is we calculate the number of inventory days and the number of accounts receivable days. So this is something, if any of you guys already work in business, you'll know that these are metrics that we work out every single month in a business. Operating cycle is number of inventory days plus the number of receivable days. So you can see we've done here, we've worked out the number of inventory days as being 73. In the question, they told us the receivable days are 57 days. And if we add those two together, our operating cycle is 130 days. So by operating cycle, that is the number of days from the day that I purchase my inventory, whether it's finished goods or raw materials, up until the day that I receive the cash for the goods that I then sold. So if we are a manufacturer, we'll purchase raw materials, we'll convert the raw materials into finished goods. We then sell the finished goods on credit, and we have to wait a certain number of days before our customers pay us. So from the day that we receive delivery of our raw materials until the day that our customer eventually pays us for our finished goods, that entire number of days is what we call the operating cycle. And in this question, that's a full 130 days. So what that means is for 130 days, I do not have any cash coming into my business. I've had to purchase inventory, convert it so that I can sell it, and then I've had to wait for my customers to pay me because I sell on credit. So what does a business do for those 130 days while they are waiting to be paid for those goods? And this is the whole cash management cycle that financial managers are involved in. So after the operating cycle, we then calculate something called the cash conversion cycle. Sorry, I should have done this first. The cash conversion cycle is now when we are going to combine the current assets days, which is the operating cycle, which is inventory days and receivables days, with our current liabilities, which is the accounts payable days. Because those we are assuming that that inventory that we purchased, we also purchased it on credit. So I didn't pay for those goods on day number 1 of those 130 days. I only paid for the goods according to the purchase terms that I had with my supplier. So let's say my supplier's terms are 30 days. So that means 30 days after I purchased the goods, my inventory, I then had to physically pay my supplier for the goods, which then means that there would then only be 100 days that I am waiting for cash to come in. So in this particular question in 4.1, our cash conversion cycle works out to be 70 days because our operating cycle is 130 days. My accounts payable is 60 days. That means this supplier is allowing me to pay them after 60 days, which means that there are only 70 days that I am waiting for cash to come in at the end of my cash conversion cycle. So the management of my inventory days, my receivables days, and my payables days, which are 3 different measures, is absolutely critical to managing the total number of days in my cash conversion cycle. So we as financial managers want to keep our inventory days and our receivable days as small as possible. In other words, I want to turn my inventory over quickly, and I want to collect my credit sales quickly, and I want my accounts payable days to be as long as possible, so that when I then work out inventory days plus receivables days, that total is as small as possible. And when I subtract my payable days, that payables is as big as possible, which will end up leaving me with a total cash conversion cycle days that is as low as I can manage without risking the efficiency of my business. So that's kind of very much in a nutshell the theory behind this cash conversion operating cycle and the cash conversion cycle, which is our working capital management. Yes, Norman, you're 100% correct. They need to fund themselves, the balance of the cash con, those 70 days, the business needs to fund themselves. So where are they going to get the money from to fund themselves over those 70 days? If you look at this, we've got 130 days in our operating cycle minus 60 days in my payables. So my total cash conversions cycle is 70 days. So where's the business going to get the cash from to pay their wages, pay their rent, keep the lights on for those 70 days while they are waiting for their customers to pay them? Where's that money going to come from? In this particular theory in the textbook, there's one place in particular that we assume the business gets the money from. Where would that be? Where would you assume? Where does the business get cash from? And remember, this is all short term. It's not long-term loans. It's short-term cash, both assets and liabilities short-term. A short-term loan, so what's our most common access to short-term finance? Remember, this is on a day-to-day basis. Today I might have to pay my rent. Tomorrow I've got to pay wages. Then the electricity bill is due. Then I have to pay other. Yes, exactly. Your bank overdraft. So we're assuming that my access to cash for those 70 days while I'm waiting for the cash to come in is my bank overdraft. And in this question 3, they tell us here the company's current total annual investment in working capital is 16.25 million at a cost of 8% per annum. So that cost of 8%. This is what we are assuming is our, oh, I don't want that so big, sorry. Is our overdraft rate. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, exactly. Sometimes there's intercompany, if in big groups where there are, especially where you've got a mother company and smaller subsidiaries, often their access to short-term finance is through the parent company at a particular interest. But that would also operate in a similar way to an overdraft, where they would be charged a certain percentage and they would have to settle it. Yes, that makes complete sense. That's also very common. Okay. Do you guys understand that? So does that all make sense to you, how we are working? So let's go back to question 4.1. So now you understand the operating cycle, you understand the cash conversion cycle and what it means for a company and how we are going to pay for our operations while we are waiting for the cash to finally come in from our credit customers. So in question 4.1, this is again your textbook question, it says that the company wants to implement a plan that will result in a reduction in the number of days in their cash conversion cycle by 15. In other words, they want to shorten their cash conversion cycle, which is obviously the goal of most companies. Their current annual average spend on working capital is 3.65 million. So look carefully at that wording, the current average annual spend on working capital. So that means over the course of 365 days, they spend 3.65 million on working capital. And in question 4.1, the company's cost for that working capital is 12% per annum for these resources. Then they say the current company currently turns inventory at a rate of 5 times per annum. So if your inventory turns are 5 times per annum, that means to work out how many days there are in each turn, your calculation would be 365 divided by the 5 here on the screen, 365 divided by 5, and that is how they calculated that their number of inventory days is 73 days. They pay their creditors after 60 days, so this is where we got the 60 over here, the 60 payable days. In this question, they gave us that total. And they have an accounts receivable collection period of 57 days. So again, this 57 was given to us. In your question and the assignment, you have to calculate your inventory days, your receivable days, and your payable days for both 2021 and 2022. You did those calculations in Finance 2, so go back to your second year textbook for those formulas for calculating inventory days and receivable, etc. I think if I remember correctly, they give you those formulas again here in Learning Unit 4. Yes, they do. But remember, you did learn that last year if you guys all did Finance 2 last year. So in this question, we are taking second year finance and we're now expanding certain calculations that you were taught last year, and we're now applying them to the bigger picture in a company. Then question 4.1 says the required is part 1, calculate the operating cycle. So your theory says that the operating cycle is inventory days plus receivable days. They gave us the receivable days, so we had to calculate inventory days in order to be able to give the answer of the operating days. Then part 2 says calculate the cash conversion cycle. So in part 2, we know that our formula for cash conversion cycle, CCC, is operating cycle minus accounts payable days. So we already calculated the operating cycle in part 1. They gave us the 60 days. So all we had to do was take OC minus 60 to give the CCC of 70 days. In your question in the assignment, they are not giving you any days. You have to calculate all of those days using your formulas. Then in part 3 of question 4.1, they say calculate the rand investment required to support the cash conversion cycle. So we can't do this question without knowing how many days our cash conversion cycle is. So we know that it's 70 days. They told us that our total annual spend on working capital is 3.650 million, okay, for a whole year. So we take the entire annual spend, we divide it by 365, which gives us our investment per 1 day. Then once we know that, we can multiply the investment per 1 day by the number of days in our operating cycle. So that's 10,000 rands times 70 days equals 700,000 rand. So that means that at any one point in time, the business has to have invested in their working capital 700,000 rand. That's the investment required to support a cash conversion cycle of 70 days if their annual spend on working capital is 3.65 million. Does that make sense to you? Have you followed that calculation? So remember, always in these questions, they will give you some information. They won't give you all of the information. Some of the variables you're going to have to calculate yourself. But remember, they will always give you sufficient information to calculate the various variables that you need in order to calculate OC, CCC, daily investment, rand investment required, etc. And that's where they've got a little bit tricky in question 3. Then let's just quickly take a look at part 4 of this question. In part 4, they have said calculate the amount by which annual profits will increase. So this is where it comes quite similar to your question 3 in assignment 2. If the plan to reduce the cash conversion cycle, remember they said they wanted to reduce it by 15 days, is implemented. And then they say, hint, the cost of working capital resources in the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income is the annual percentage resource cost, which was our 12% overdraft, multiplied by the rand investment in the cash conversion cycle. So one thing I want to just be sure that you make sure you know the difference. We've got 2 rand values. I've got the total annual working capital investment, and I have got the rand investment required to support my cash conversion cycle. So your total annual investment in working capital is always going to be quite a bit larger than the rand investment required to support the CCC. Because this annual investment in working capital is your investment over the full 365 days, whereas your investment required to support the CCC is your rand amount invested only for those number of days of your cash conversion cycle. I'm just telling you that so that you read your questions super carefully. Okay, so now they've told us we wanted to reduce our cash conversion cycle by 15 days. So if we have a look here at part 4, we've already worked out that our investment in our working capital for 1 day is 10,000 Rand. So if we multiply that by the 15 days that we want to reduce it by, I'm going to have a saving of 150,000. So in other words, my 700,000 investment, I will be able to reduce it by 150,000. But what will my actual savings be that will affect my profit? If I take my 150,000 savings and I multiply it by my cost of capital of 12%, I will make a savings in expenses of 18,000. In other words, I will save 18,000 Rands worth of interest expense per annum because my investment in my working capital to support my cash conversion cycle reduced from 700,000 to, what would that be, 550,000. So because I was able to reduce that usage of overdraft by 150,000, I was able to save 18,000 Rands worth of interest. So these principles from question 4.1 are exactly what is applied in your question 3. I won't go over those 3 revision questions, so go and have a look at those 3 revision questions in your textbook as well. They're similar to this question, and the more you look at them and understand the solution and the calculations that were done, the easier your question 3 is going to be. Anybody got any questions about that question 4.1 that we've just been through? Did you guys understand it? And remember, understanding doesn't mean that you could go away right now and do the question yourself without looking, but just that you've understood my explanation of all of those concepts. Okay, most of you, those that haven't indicated yes, are you offline watching Netflix, or have you got an actual question? And remember, if there's something you haven't understood, send me a message afterwards or an email and just ask me for help. If there was anything that you didn't understand at all, and I will be able to help you. Okay, that's good. So most of you managed that. I wish, Norman, it would make my life easier as well as yours. You know what? I think what I forgot to do now when I was explaining that answer for question 4.1, did I share my screen? I'm sorry, my brain is, did I share my screen when I did that or not? Could you see the solution to question 4.1 on the screen, or did I forget to share the screen? Oh my word. I've just looked at that now. Let me just quickly do that. You've got my explanation, but I'm going to, sorry guys. It's been quite a traumatic week for me, this. So my brain is really not working 100%. Sorry, so sorry about that. Yeah, I've been explaining and drawing and writing on this thing, and you guys couldn't see it. Next time you must just say, hey, ma'am, we can't see a single thing. Please share your screen. I don't mind being yelled at. Okay, so just quickly, you have got the solution in your textbook, so I'm not actually worried about it, but it would have just helped if you could have seen it while I was talking. Okay, so number one, calculating the operating cycle. They gave us the 57 receivable days. You had to work out the inventory days. They told us that we had 5 inventory turns per annum. Also, always look to see, they will always give you the number of days in the year. So always look, sometimes they get tricky and they say 360 days. So don't always assume 365 days. Sometimes they give you a different number. So 365 divided by 5, that means in each one of those 5 turns, there are 73 days. So our inventory days cycle is 73. So that was the 73 plus the 57. Gave us 130 days operating cycle. They gave us the 60 days payable. So 130 minus 60 is our CCC, was the 70 days. Then that was part 1 and 2. Part 3 was taking the total annual investment in working capital, divided it by 365 days to get 1 day's worth of investment. Multiply that by the 70 days in the cash conversion cycle, which tells us that we need to have 700,000 invested at any one point in time in our working capital to support our cash conversion cycle if it lasts for 70 days. Then part 4 was, if that 70 days reduces by 15 days, what is our saving or increase in profit? So 10,000 Rand times 15 days means we can reduce our investment 700,000 minus 150,000. So 150,000 times the 12% cost of capital or overdraft rate means that we would save our 18% actual interest expense. So our profit would increase by 18,000 Rand if we reduced our cash conversion cycle by 15 days. Okay, so that was oh, thank you, Norman. Okay, so everybody's understood that. So just one last thing before we go. I know we're getting on. I just want to go and share the assignment document with you again quickly, because they ask just to show you those tricks that they've got. Let's stop that. I want to, okay, there we go. Just go to question 3. Okay, so remember, all the variables that you need to be able to work out a cash conversion cycle is you need to work out the inventory days, the payables days, and the receivables days. Now, if you remember your formulas for those 3 calculations, if you go to page 104, you've got your inventory days and accounts receivable days formulas at the bottom of the page. And if you go to page 106 in example 4.2, you've got your formula for accounts payable days. Okay, so the other figures we need to know is we need to know our total credit purchases, our total credit sales, and our cost of sales. We need to know those three amounts because we need those amounts to include in our formulas to calculate inventory days, debtors days, and payables days. So you will note in this question 3, they have not given you the rand value of purchases, receivables, or payables, or cost of sales. Sorry, what did I say? They haven't given us credit sales, they haven't given us cost of sales, they haven't given us credit purchases. So those three figures or amounts, you have to calculate using this information in the question here. So this is where they are deliberately testing your knowledge of your various formulas so that you can use this information to calculate that. But if you look at it carefully, you'll easily be able to do those calculations. Let's have a look at what they have given us. They've told us, they've given us the gross profit. So they say our gross profit is 8.5 million. And take note, this is for 2022. You've got to do these calculations for, you've got to work out your number of days for both 2021 and 2022. Then they've told us the total annual investment in working capital is 16.25 million and the cost is 8% per annum. There are 365 days in a year. And then up at the top, they say the company strives for a 25% markup on cost. So if you can work out your cost, you'll be able to work out your sales by adding 25% to the cost. Yeah, cost plus 25% would give you your sales. And then of your total sales, 75% is credit sales. Okay, so that's the route you've got to take to work out your credit sales amount. Then they have said purchases are 80% of your cost of sales, and of that, 40% is for cash. So if 40% of my cost of sales is for cash, then that means that 60%, sorry about the massive font, 60% credit. Yeah. So you've got all this information here, and all that they've given you is your gross profit as a rand value. They told you here that your markup is 25% on cost. We know that the rand value of our markup on cost or the gross profit on sales, the rand value is identical. But we either express that profit as a markup on cost percentage or a gross profit percentage. So you've just got to be super careful. I can't give you the exact answer here. You have to try and work it out yourself. I'm giving you as many hints as possible. But remember, if you've got any, try and work it out yourself and then ask me whether your calculation is correct or not. So very carefully go through all of this, but remember this is what you're going to, in order to calculate inventory days, you need to calculate your cost of sales rand value for the year. in order to calculate your receivables control. You need to calculate your credit sales for the year in order to calculate your payables control. You also have to calculate your credit purchases for the year. And they have given you all the information you need to do that, but they've spread it around with all of these clues. The only rand value they've given you is your gross profit rand figure, and the rest they've given you in terms of percentages, etc. Are you guys with me? Do you see what you've got to do? Yes, they are trying to act very clever, and they're trying to see how clever you are. So this is also why I want to say, give yourself a full weekend for each of the questions. You've got 3 weekends left between now and handing date. Give yourself a full weekend for each question so that you've got time to sit and ponder and look up these things and experiment and chat to each other to make sure that you've got it right. Yes, perfect. I'm done. Sorry for keeping you so late. I'm going to end the recording right now, and you guys go off to tax, and I will see you in the next collab. And remember, just let me know if there's any questions. Thanks, guys. Awesome. Thanks, guys. See you later.